A cordial greeting to all. Welcome back to this self-knowledge course. This is topic number 30 of this course. The objective of this course is to give us a guide so that we can awaken 100% of our consciousness. And that is why today, we are going to look at this important topic, where we will explain the method to awaken consciousness. In this topic, we are going to understand why our conscience is asleep. Since only by knowing the true causes of our current state, can we understand what actions we can take to change it. And we can also deduce what are the methods that can really lead us to an awakening. Since there are currently many methods, practices, rituals, substances, drugs, etc., that promise to lead us to an awakening of consciousness, but that only lead us to fall into deeper levels in that dream of consciousness. So, the objectives of this conference will be that we become clear about how our consciousness is divided, what is called objective consciousness, and what is called subjective consciousness. And we are going to analyze in detail how we can awaken our objective consciousness, and how we can release and awaken our subjective consciousness. So, I think the first thing we must clarify is, what is objective, and what is subjective? We can say that objective is that which pursues the purpose, or objective, for which it was conceived. All of us came into this existence with a purpose. The part of our consciousness that is objective is the one that will always seek to achieve that purpose. At the same time, it recognizes that everyone in this world has come with this same purpose, which is to get to know themselves, and therefore, it will seek to achieve this goal, while helping others to achieve it as well. That, which is objective in us, will always consider everyone's point of view. It will not be based on illusions or beliefs, but will seek to experience what is real, avoiding becoming identified with the subjective things of this world. On the other hand, subjective is everything that does not have a conscious objective or purpose. The subjective seeks superfluous and selfish objectives, and always looks out for its particular interest. The subjective in us will only consider its particular point of view, its beliefs, and concepts, and it is what manifests in our inner world when we identify with what one of ourselves, or psychological defects, feels, thinks, and desires. And it will always lead us to pursue subjective and inconsequential purposes, such as obtaining money, fame, prestige, etc. From the above, we can deduce that we all have two types of consciousness, since we all come from the sacred absolute Sun with a 3% of awakened and self-conscious essence, and a 97% of innocent essence. That 97% of innocent essence is trapped by the ego to carry out a learning process. In all our egoic expressions, we have a percentage of consciousness trapped. In our expressions of lust, anger, laziness, pride, envy, etc., there is a well-defined percentage of our consciousness that we must rescue. Our 3% will be responsible for helping us free up the other 97%. The 3% makes up our spirit, it is the divine spark in each of us. And it is self-conscious, it is objective, it is wisdom, it is light. Therefore, it cannot be conditioned by the ego. The 97% makes up our soul, which is our energy. So, when we talk about subjective consciousness, we are talking about the 97% of our essence that is trapped in our ego, and that is processed under the conditioning of the ego. That is that as long as that essence, which is fire and light, or encouragement and wisdom, is conditioned by a psychological defect, that defect will manage our encouragement, our willpower, and our intelligence. As we saw in lesson number 11, the soul is a set of faculties, powers, and virtues, which, being currently trapped by the ego, now act according to the conditioning of the ego that has trapped it. For example, currently our physical strength is trapped by our anger, and our anger uses it to harm others. Our sexual potency is currently conditioned by lust, and lust uses it to satisfy our carnal desires and degenerate us more and more. And so, each of our defects has a portion of our essence subdued. And as I said a moment ago, we can differentiate the objective from the subjective, because the subjective will always look out for its particular interest, for the satisfaction of its egoic desires, while the objective will seek the common good. For example, when we let ourselves be carried away by laziness, it is only interested in doing nothing, procrastinating, entertaining and distracting ourselves, without caring if others are very busy, doing alone what would be done faster and easier with our collaboration. The same when we are moved by jealousy, envy, greed, etc. Each defect will always look after its particular interest. It will be impossible to awaken consciousness, as long as it continues to be bottled up among so many negative ways of being that inhabit us. Only with the death of the ego is the essence released. And the greater the amount of essence released, the greater our self-awareness. Every time we let our defects to act in us, and we do not do the exercise of psychological death, our ego feed on our energy, grow, and have a greater capacity to submit us. If we let anger manifest frequently, we become increasingly violent. If we let lust manifest frequently, we become more and more lustful and more perverse. If we let sadness manifest frequently, it will become increasingly difficult for us to get out of those states of depression and melancholy. That is why we must constantly be in self-observation and practicing psychological death, to eliminate each of our defects, and thus, rescue the trapped consciousness. The other part of our consciousness, that 3% self-conscious essence that we all have, is the objective consciousness. The 3% came with the purpose of knowing oneself. It is not at all interested in whether we have a house, car, fame, money, or material goods. The 3% is only interested in rescuing the 97% of the essence trapped in the ego, thus, rescuing all the wisdom that essence acquired during the entire time it was conditioned, and recovering all those faculties, virtues, powers and forces, to manage them consciously. We all have within us that divine spark, that 3% of consciousness, that knows the path to self-realization, and that will be our guide through this path to self-knowledge. Unfortunately, in us, human beings, that 3% is asleep due to the fascination that we have fallen into with our personality, with material things, and with everything that this world offers us. However, when we were babies, we had that 3% awake. And it is that 3% of consciousness that gives babies that shine and natural beauty that characterizes them. When babies are born, they have many faculties, and they can perceive, not only the physical part, but also other dimensions. They can remember their past lives, and some even maintain that ability for some time. Newborn babies handle telepathy, and that is why a newborn can make his mother feel what is happening to him. Like when the baby cries, and the mother usually knows if he is crying because he is hungry, or because the diaper is dirty, or because something hurts. And we usually think that it is a gift that the mother has, but in reality, it is a gift that the baby has. Young babies also have the ability to see adults as they really are. They can see their psychological defects, their perversity, their intentions, etc. And that is why there are babies who cry inexplicably in the presence of certain people. And because they can still perceive other dimensions, babies can also see their own psychological defects, which they have formed throughout their many existences, and see them as monsters, or ghosts lurking around the crib, wanting to enter the baby's body. But these defects cannot enter yet, because the baby has not yet formed a personality. And babies cry uncontrollably and inexplicably in the presence of these ghosts or monsters, and parents in their unconsciousness do not understand the night terrors of young children. But when the child grows and forms a new personality, defects begin to enter and take possession of the human machine. Personality is an energetic vehicle that is formed through imitation between the ages of 0 and 7. The child's personality is formed according to the country or region in which he is born, according to the customs of the place, and what he sees others doing. As the personality is formed, defects enter little by little, according to the electropsychic design of the personality that he brings to that existence. For example, if the child has in his electropsychic design a tendency to violence, when he sees his father mistreating his mother and mistreating him, he begins to imitate that violent attitude. Then, the defects of anger that he already carried from other existences begin to enter and manifest in him. And then the kid starts fighting with his brothers and friends. And when he grows up, anger will dominate that personality, turning him into a violent person. But if, on the contrary, he has in his electropsychic design the formation of a passive or submissive personality, he will have the tendency to imitate, in the case of this example, the submissive attitude of his mother. And so, he develops his complex personality, which will end up becoming his way of being. Personality keeps us fascinated with the different things of the physical world. And that fascination sleeps the 3% of consciousness that was awake. We become fascinated with school, with friends, with money, with movies, with girlfriends, with fornication, etc. We forget our consciousness and the 3% falls asleep. The personality begins to silence that inner force that all the time drives us to search for something higher within ourselves. Personality is the vehicle for the expression of psychological defects. But personality is illusory. We must understand that there is no future for personality. Personality dies in time, but consciousness never dies, since it is eternal. At the moment of physical death, 3 things die. The physical body dies. And we will see at that moment that it was of no use having dedicated our lives to creating a fortune and grooming ourselves so much physically, if in the end, we will not be able to take any of it with us. The organic vital fund also dies, which is the energetic part of our physical body. The vital fund, like a ghost, disintegrates little by little, in front of the tomb as the physical body also disintegrates. And the personality also dies. Although it may take a little longer to disintegrate, since when he was someone famous, or someone who was very attached to life, that energetic vehicle can remain like a ghost, wandering for a time, and being fed by the energy of those who remember him, and who cry for him. After death, the personality will dissolve very slowly until it becomes cosmic dust. But it is important to note that none of these 3 aspects is consciousness. Since, at the moment of physical death, consciousness, what we really are, goes to the 5th dimension to live the entire process of judgments that we saw in Lesson 2, and to wait for a new physical body. Now, the ego, each of our psychological defects, does not die with the death of the physical body either, since they have trapped in themselves a portion of our immortal essence, which allows them to transcend the death of the physical body. The ego will only die when we voluntarily decide to eliminate it by practicing psychological death, or in the process of involution, which is the passage through the infradimensions that occurs once we exhaust our 108 opportunities with human physical bodies, without doing this work of liberation and awakening of consciousness. In the infradimensions, the ego will be disintegrated in a process that can take thousands of years, so that the essence can be released again, which will emerge clean and innocent from that process, to connect again to the wheel of samsara, to live another cycle, and develop a new soul, since the previous one was lost in the process of involution. But as long as we have not exhausted those 108 opportunities, by law of return we must return and take on a new physical body. And unfortunately, upon returning to a new physical body and developing a new personality, the ego rejoins. Everything we have seen so far allows us to understand that we must do 2 different works. The first is to awaken the 3% of objective consciousness. And the second is to release and awaken the 97% of subjective consciousness. How are we going to awaken the 3% of objective consciousness? The first thing we have to do is start working with the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness: dying, being born, and sacrificing ourselves for humanity. We work on the dying factor, or psychological death, when we begin to make the effort to observe ourselves from moment to moment, to remain awake, to recognize our psychological defects, and ask our particular Divine Mother for their elimination. Then that power of our conscience begins to awaken, which is capable of freeing us from all the ego, and the ability to judge ourselves also starts awakening. The work with the second factor, which is the spiritual birth, occurs when we begin to understand the value of sexual energy, when we stop expelling it out of our body through masturbation and through fornication during the sexual practice, and we begin to unite sexually with a stable partner of the opposite sex, to make that energy ascend through our spine in the practice of suprasex. It is through this practice that we will be able to develop all the powers and faculties of our consciousness. And practicing sacrifice for humanity, which is giving this knowledge to all our brothers of humanity, to help them also have the tools to achieve their own awakening, will cause that the force of the Father, which is the wisdom of that 3%, starts to awaken in us. The second thing we must do to awaken the 3% is to get out of the fascination in which our personality put us with the things of the world. We achieve this by working with reflection and psychological death, all those concepts that keep us entangled in the things of the personality, that keep us dedicating all our time and energy to pursuing the subjective goals of the personality. And that therefore, we never have the interest, time, or energy to work in the search for the awakening and development of our consciousness. And the third step will be to begin to transfer our center of gravity, which currently only revolves around personality things, back to consciousness. And we will achieve this as we dedicate more and more time to developing the practices that will lead us to awaken our consciousness, such as the practices of meditation, astral projection, watching and praying, karma negotiation, suprasex, preparing for teach knowledge, etc. And how will we know that our 3% have woken up? Because we will have the spirit and the ability to be in self-observation for much of our day, because we will easily recognize how the practice of the 3 factors guides us towards that return to our being, because we will have a fervent desire to work on ourselves. And the things of the world, and of the personality, will begin to lose value and begin to take a back seat. The second work we will need to do is to release and awaken the 97% of subconsciousness. And we will achieve this by dying in ourselves. That is, eliminating each of our psychological defects or negative ways of being by practicing psychological death. We must remember that, the greater the number of disintegrated egos, the greater the self-awareness. The smaller the number of disintegrated egos, the lower the percentage of awakened consciousness. So, the work will consist of keeping ourselves at all times in a state of self-observation, directing our attention towards our inner world, in order to discover the different defects that manifest themselves in our mind, in our emotion, and in our motor instinctive sexual part. Observe how these defects have the purpose of taking us out of the present moment, and of the state of self-remembering, to lead us to become identified with the different circumstances of life, in order to waste our energies in all kinds of mechanical reactions. Each discovered defect must be judged in order to understand that that thought, emotion, reaction, sensation, etc., comes from our ego, and that, therefore, our consciousness is trapped, or conditioned, by that wrong way of being. Understand how it affects us and prevents us from awakening. And the third thing is to proceed with its elimination. And we do this by begging our particular Divine Mother to disintegrate that defect in each center where we observe it manifest. With each request for death, we will release small portions of the trapped essence, and gradually our level of consciousness will increase, from 3% to 4, 5, 10, 15%. And so on. Until, through the constant practice of the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness, we achieve the awakening of 100% of our consciousness, thus achieving true enlightenment. And this has been the topic we had for today. I hope it has allowed you to understand that when we release the subjective consciousness trapped in psychological defects, we convert it into objective consciousness. Remember that if you have any questions about this, you can leave it in the comments, or contact me directly, and I will be happy to resolve any concerns that may arise regarding the topic. Without further ado, I invite you to the next conference, Mechanical Creatures. A very interesting conference in which we will talk about the importance of stop being so mechanical. Since, as long as we remain robotic creatures, acting under the mechanical programming of our ego, we will not be able to awaken consciousness. Until next time.